Alright y'all, welcome back to Combat Arms channel. So today's video was actually a recommendation that I got on my Irish Army Ranger Wing video, and this is about the Siege of Jadotville. So I've seen the movie, and I'm sure a lot of y'all have seen the movie for this, but I gotta say, when I watched the movie, I couldn't really appreciate it as much as I might be able to today. And mainly because I wasn't in the military, I didn't really understand what was happening. But at the same time, I didn't really know the whole background information. I wasn't really paying attention to the movie. I was more focused on the action. So it's cool. I want to check out this video. This is about the Siege of Jadotville, but it'll probably go a little more in depth as to the background and what actually happened during that battle. So this happened back in 1961, so it's pretty old, but it's cool to check up on these sort of things because this is one of those stories where there's a lot of badasses doing a lot of badass things, but it didn't necessarily get the attention it deserved right away. So it's cool to check out these videos and give a little more attention to them, give some love to them. But again, if you guys aren't subscribed, definitely feel free to hit that subscribe button. I think right now about 98% of the viewers aren't subscribed, which is totally fine. It makes sense just because for reaction videos, I do a bunch of reactions to a bunch of different topics, and you might not necessarily be interested in all of them. But if you realize you've come back to watching the other videos and you realize you like the content, feel free to hit the subscribe, maybe hit the bell so you're notified whenever I upload anything else, and you might be interested in stuff that I upload in the future. So I would definitely appreciate it, but I'm very excited to check this out. Again, this was a recommendation that I was getting from a lot of my Irish fans, so I do appreciate that. So let's check it out. Should be interesting. Should learn a lot, hopefully.
The Siege of Jadotville, September 13th through the 17th,
Okay. Jadotville.
1961.
Okay.
The Siege of Jadotville from September 13th to the 17th, 1961 was a forgotten military action of the Irish UN peacekeeping forces during the Congo crisis. It's the story of 155 soldiers of the A Company, 35th Battalion of the Irish Army, who fought against an enemy that outnumbered them for 5 days while kept under siege in the hostile region.
Yeah, there's a lot of, so real quick, there's a lot of stories, where you'll hear about a bunch of people who are outnumbered and they do some incredible things. I know, like, when you talk about 13 hours and, Benghazi and whatnot, that's just one of many examples. But yeah, with Africa, there's a bunch of stories that I wasn't really aware of, like Operation Barus and whatnot. There's a lot of stuff going on that I wasn't really aware of it just because I'm from the United States, and we didn't necessarily have the same operations going on in these different countries. So it takes a little bit of time to actually get spun up on everything. And at the same time, I was also born in the 90s, so I didn't really have this exposure. I didn't really see this sort of stuff on the news as it was happening.
Because they surrendered only when they were left without water, food, and ammunition, the document of their heroism was kept under the carpet for more than 50 years. The Congo crisis began in 1960. The same year when the country declared independence after almost a century-long Belgian rule. After only a few months, the central government lost control over the country as Katanga, led by Prime Minister Moise Tshombe, declared its independence, later followed by Kasai, Oriental Province, and Leopoldville. Katanga was of greater importance to the future of the Congo, as it was the wealthiest portion of the country due to its huge mining resources. Without the capacity to deal with secessionists and the Belgian army that still had not left the country, the government of the Republic of the Congo, led by President Kasavubu and Prime Minister Lumumba, called the United Nations for help.
All right, so already we're getting way bigger background information than I got when I was actually watching the movie. So I know there's a whole bunch of territories and colonies from all these other different countries, especially around like Africa. I know the United Kingdom or Britain specifically has a bunch of territories in the general region. But yeah, I didn't know Belgium really had any hand in Africa, or at least the Congo. So yeah, it's cool to sort of learn up on these things. When you think of histories of countries, it can get very complicated to actually look in depth. But I mean, just understanding the general rule of how things were and where it sort of shifted is good to know. I know with the United States it's pretty easy because we have a very short history. I mean, you can go back to the colonies like 1492 and whatnot. But yeah, with the United States it's very easy to learn our history and how things sort of progress. But with other regions, man, it can get super complicated. So it's cool to learn up on these things eventually.
In July 1960, the United Nations Operation in the Congo, or ONUC, was formed. UN peacekeeping forces from Africa, Asia, and Europe were deployed across the entire country with a task to monitor the withdrawal of Belgian troops and protect the civilian population. The Irish contingent, along with the Swedish and Indian soldiers, were sent to the disputed region of Katanga.
Okay.
The UN headquarters was established at the province's capital, Elizabethville.
Good to know.
HQ deployed a detached unit to the 80-mile-away distant town of Jadotville with the task of protecting the local Belgian population. Jadotville was a town of great strategic importance because of the nearby Shinkolobwe mine. It was a mine with the largest uranium deposits in the world. And it was this mine that provided the uranium needed to make the Hiroshima and Nagasaki A-bombs.
Yeah, that's also another thing I don't really consider. Like with uranium, it's obviously it's a very strategic resource to have and whatnot. This is sort of reminding me of the game Civilization, if any of y'all have played that. But yeah, with uranium, yeah, like, I didn't really know that there were uranium mines in Africa. I didn't really consider where they were, but I kind of just think they're in like a very cold, crappy region, like I don't know, like somewhere in Siberia or something. But yeah, I mean that's also cool to see how the resources sort of play into all these sort of battles and all these situations, because a lot of times it's resources getting pulled in certain directions, so it can create some hostilities. But yeah, good to know. Again, a thing I wouldn't really consider, because with the United States, we don't really have resources that people want to come and get easily, just because we have water surrounding us, and it's not really been an issue since our history.
Even though the UN forces were responsible for protecting the local population, it was obvious they were not welcome. Neither natives nor Belgians who supported Katanga secessionists looked with favor on the UN base in the town.
That's a hard position to be
Commander
in.
of A Company, 35th Battalion of the Irish Army stationed in Jadotville, Commandant Pat Quinlan, was very well aware of the situation. As a measure of precaution, he ordered his men to build a defensive perimeter around the entire base.
I remember
They were told
that.
to dig deep trenches, stockpile water, and carry their guns at all times.
Right.
The following days would show how good this preparation.
Yeah, I remember seeing that in the movie. Now, I didn't really understand, why they're doing it. I think it showed it from the troops' perspective, where they didn't really appreciate that they had to dig and do all this like heavy lifting for the defense. But when you're in a higher position and you need to understand how the locals actually view your presence there, you can understand why you'd want to dig a little bit deeper for that defense, especially if things went south. So it's a hard position for him to be in, but it's also hard for the dudes on the ground, or the dudes who are having to do the dirty work, because all of a sudden they're in the UN, they're on this UN mission, they're pushed out in a region they're not familiar with, around people they're not familiar with, and all of a sudden the people don't appreciate that they're there, so they're probably questioning what they're actually doing. So it must have been hard for them to sort of wrap their mind around that. I'm not necessarily sure if y'all have any experiences, or if you knew anyone who actually took part in this. It'd be cool to sort of hear it from their perspective about how they actually viewed it, and what their thoughts actually were while they were doing all of this.
Was. On September 13, 1961, ONUC launched an offensive named Operation Morthor against the forces of the state of Katanga. This action meant that the UN directly sided with the Central Congo government. The Katangese response was immediate, as if they knew about the UN offensive before it happened.
Scary
It was
stuff.
to be a quick offensive lasting 2 hours to resolve the secession once and for all. In fact, lasted from September 13th to the 21st, and was the moment in which a peacekeeping mission turned into a war between the UN and the Katanga.
That's rough.
On the same day at 7:40 a.m., while almost all Irish soldiers were attending Mass, Katanga Gendarmerie attacked the Jadotville base. Luckily for the Irish soldiers, they were noticed by Private Billy Reddy, who was on guard duty that morning.
Good stuff.
Private Reddy fired a warning shot and alerted the whole unit. As the
Yeah, it's kind of messed up. They were attacking him when they were doing their mass, and I'm sure it was probably planned that way. Just sort of catch them off guard. But at least we had a solid dude on security during that time. A lot of times people don't really consider the importance of being on duty or being on a guard post, because it's just super crappy. It's super monotonous. But it's a lot of responsibility, and at least this guy was taking it seriously this day. And if he hadn't, it could have gone much worse. So good on him for that.
Irish soldiers in the base were ordered to always carry their weapons. They manned their positions instantly.
Nice.
The Katongan gendarmeries attacked the UN base with a force between 3,000 and 4,000 men. The majority of them were inexperienced soldiers from the local Luba tribe, while there were also a lot of Belgian settlers and battle-hardened mercenaries from France, Belgium, and Rhodesia. They were armed with a wide spectrum of various light weapons and supported with 81mm mortars and French 75mm MLE 1897 field guns.
That sucks.
They even had air support from a modified Fuga Magister training jet. The jet had machine guns added as well as underwing bombs, which proved crucial in the assault on the Irish peacekeepers. Katongi's forces were financed by the Anglo-Belgian.
Dude, that's super scary to go against. If you have dudes who have like mortar and artillery and even air support, like, good grief, that must be hard. Like, it's good that they had the measures in place, you know, them carrying their weapons out all the time. So at least they weren't, you know, taken completely aback where they had to prepare all this stuff. I remember watching the movie, they seemed pretty well prepared as far as like, you know, the ammunition, where it was located, everyone having their weapon on them. So it's good for them to react that quickly. But man, when people have like superior equipment and they can get that fire superiority, it's pretty crappy. It's a pretty crappy position for them to be in.
Belgian mining cartel Union Minière de Haute-Katanga, a covert international company that was responsible for supplying most of the world's copper, cobalt, and uranium.
Wow.
The base was defended by almost 160 Irish soldiers armed only with light weapons. The majority of soldiers were armed with FN FAL self-loading rifles and British Lee Enfield No. 4 rifles. They were also armed with a few Bren light machine guns, Swedish Carl Gustav light machine guns, and Vickers machine guns. The support platoon was armed with 60mm mortars. The Irish, however, had the advantage of the supreme commanding ability of Major Quinlan. The way he led his men through 5 days of the siege was nothing less than ingenious. When the assault began, the Irish soldiers' alertness and defensive perimeter enabled them to repel the first attacking wave with ease. The first attack was followed by a few hours of silence, after which a new wave followed along with bombardment from mortars and field guns. Once again, the well-entrenched Irishmen managed to withstand the attack with only a few soldiers wounded. What Major Quinlan realized on the first day was that his perimeter was too wide. Under the cover of night, he withdrew his men inwards to a new position where they dug new trenches. The new position allowed the Irish to hold a better defense, especially because it was elevated and allowed them a complete overview of their surroundings.
Well, I didn't charge. It seems like he definitely knew what he was doing. So it's good for them to have like an awesome leader like that. You know, good leadership can really take you like pretty far, especially when the soldiers themselves have like, you know, good discipline and they're able to adapt and they have the aggression to keep the fight going. Then, you know, everything sort of comes together at that point, especially when the odds are really against you, and it definitely was for them. But yeah, reorganizing their defense is very important. And it's good that they're able to take the time that they were given, you know, after they retreated to make themselves better, because they knew it was going to happen again. There's going to be another like counterattack, or if what I guess you want to call it, just a normal attack. So it's good that they're able to reorient and take advantage of that. But man, it must have been rough on the soldiers. A lot of work and a lot of stress.
The following morning started with a new barrage, but on the previously abandoned trenches. That same day, the attackers called in the air support. When the enemy Fuga Magister flew over the base, the Irish soldiers thought it was a UN plane. Moments later, the jet started bombing the Irish positions, destroying their vehicles and preventing them from making a retreat. Attack after attack in waves followed. Even though the Katongi gendarmes managed to get closer to the perimeter, the Irish managed to repel every single attack, inflicting heavy casualties on their enemy. The Irish mortars also managed to silence the Katongan artillery.
Good stuff.
As their strength severely diminished, the Katongans asked for a ceasefire. Major Quinlan agreed, as he too wanted to buy some time and allow UN reinforcements to arrive.
I know the enemy has got cavalry coming around here somewhere. I'm just not quite sure.
Man, I hate these ads. Good grief. Yeah, so a ceasefire, yeah, it sounds good and all, but at the same time, a lot of times you can't necessarily trust it, especially from the people that were trying to incite this violence against you in the first place. But yeah, I mean, he was able to take it, and they were able to use that time to prepare and sort of reorganize again. Because especially after being attacked by the air supports, it must have been really rough on them. Especially when you think the air support's from the UN, and all of a sudden it starts attacking you. Man, that's rough. So we're watching a video where this happens in like 10 seconds, but in reality, it was like either several minutes or even several hours of them being in this combat. And even if you have like a 10-minute firefight, it can seem like much longer or even much shorter. But for fighting for hours, it must have seemed like a lifetime for them, especially when the odds are really against you. But yeah, their mortar team is really solid for being able to take out the artillery. Yeah, if you have people who are well trained and disciplined and they know how to use their equipment, then you can do a lot of awesome things. And yeah, it's good that they had the discipline and they had the solid leadership to be able to bring it all together, because they seem pretty effective.
The headquarters at Elizabethville sent a reinforcement of 500 Irish, Swedish, and Indian Gurkha soldiers to relieve soldiers at Jadotville.
The Gurkhas.
But these were fought off on their way to Jadotville by mercenaries in Katangi's service. The besieged soldiers did receive help and water supplies. A helicopter carrying water landed into the base under intense fire.
Sheesh.
However, the water was undrinkable because it was stored in petrol containers. As time passed, the situation for the Irish
Who's the freaking genius that did that? Good grief.
soldiers worsened. The Katangese forces broke the ceasefire and continued their attacks. The Irish soldiers were slowly coming to the end of their ammunition and, even worse, food and water. Since Major Quinlan had not been receiving messages from his HQ about reinforcements or orders on what to do next, he decided to surrender. But before the surrender, his men had killed 50 mercenaries, more than 300 Katangese gendarmes, and wounded 1,000 more.
Wow.
Irish casualties were totaled at only 5 wounded soldiers. After 5 days of combat, they simply had no more capacity to continue the fight. On September 17th, Major Quinlan made an agreement with the Katangans to cease fire in Jadotville. The agreement, however, ended with the disarmament of Irish soldiers, who were then sent to captivity.
Man, that's such a freaking crappy position for them to put him in. I remember in the movie he was calling up a lot for help and supports, and like he wasn't really getting any responses. So it's a crappy position to be in when you're trying to get help for your dudes and it's not showing up. But it's even worse when they're completely exhausted, and sometimes you just need to consider surrendering. But they're doing a pretty freaking solid job for 5 getting injured and them taking out a bunch of dudes like that. Yeah, I mean, it goes to show that they're definitely prepared and they definitely knew what they were doing. But yeah, eventually when it's like over and over, all this stuff happening and you don't have the supplies, you just have to call it a day. But man, it sucks that he was even put in a position like that. I mean, really all of them.
During the first 3.5 weeks of captivity, the Irish soldiers were treated well. The Katangans did not want any bad publicity. Their intention was to exchange the prisoners for a UN promise of a ceasefire. When the gendarmerie took over supervision of the Irish POWs, their treatment worsened significantly, but the captured Irish were eventually exchanged for Katangese soldiers held by the United Nations. Upon release, the soldiers of the A Company 35th Irish Battalion returned to Elizabethville, where they stayed until the end of their rotation. In December 1961, they returned home to Ireland after being relieved by the 36th Irish Battalion. Instead of being welcomed with laurels, soldiers from Jadotville were met with condemnation. Despite the fact that A Company managed to fight off the much more powerful enemy, Army officials disfavored the fact that Major Quinlan eventually laid down his arms. The fact that the unit was left without ammunition, food, and
Yeah, homie, you gave him water in a freaking petrol can, like geniuses.
water, and that the command structure was the one that failed, was ignored. Only after more than 40 years, men of A Company of the 35th Battalion were given credit for their bravery during the Siege of Jadotville. Major Quinlan was posthumously relieved of all allegations of soldierly misconduct. In November 2005, a monument was unveiled to the brave soldiers of A Company of the 35th Battalion in Costume Barracks, Athlone.
Awesome. Yeah, so again, it's kind of like, I guess to compare it to American history, it's like a lot of the people who fought in the Vietnam War, they come back and they're expecting all this treatment. Even during World War II, people were coming back and they just weren't getting necessarily the recognition that they should have gotten. And that's just because people didn't really understand. Civilians don't really understand what's going on, especially when the media starts spinning things up a certain way, like them just surrendering. they probably didn't know the whole situation. So yeah, it's hard. It's a hard position for them to be in, but I mean, they did get recognition eventually. It just kind of sucks that it took that long. But yeah, I mean, that dude was a badass leader. So again, if you guys can give any more background information for this, if you've heard any cool stories, particularly about this unit, or maybe anyone who took part in this operation, definitely let me know in the comments section. It's really cool to have that sort of background knowledge. You can learn things from certain videos and look at documentaries and whatnot, but it's cool to get the experiences from people who are directly involved. So if you have any of those, definitely feel free to put those in the comment section. But this is a pretty solid video. It definitely gave me a little more understanding as to what actually happened on that day, and how sucky it must have been for them. I think anyone in the military can appreciate, the lack of supplies, the lack of sleep, and just all the stress being put on you in such a short amount of time can be pretty rough. And it even sucks because they got taken out of the fight, but they had to stay there until like December. So they weren't even able to return home right after that. So yeah, it must have been rough. But yeah, this is a very cool video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. It was definitely cool to learn a little bit more and refresh myself on the situation. And I guess give these guys a little more recognition, because they definitely deserve it. But again, if you guys have any experiences to share in the comments, please do. I really do appreciate that when y'all do it. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed the video. That is it for this one, so I'll see y'all in the next one.